My name is Emma, I'm 33, and my younger sister got pregnant with my fiancé while I worked overtime for our wedding. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled their lives, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. To really understand how two people could betray someone so completely, you have to understand the ground the betrayal was built on. My entire life, I was the foundation, and my younger sister, Vanessa, was the beautiful, delicate house built on top of me. I was the responsible one. She was the golden child. I'm sure some of you listening right now have felt that dynamic in your own families. It's a quiet poison, one that seeps into your bones and shapes you long before you even know you're being molded. It started early. I remember my 16th birthday with a clarity that still stings. My parents, beaming with pride, handed me a crisp $100 savings bond. "You're so practical, Emma," my mom said, her voice full of genuine admiration for my perceived maturity. "We know you'll put this toward your college fund." And I did. I smiled, said thank you, and tucked it away, because that was my role. I was the sensible one, the one who planned for the future. That same year, for Vanessa's 11th birthday, she got a pony. A living, breathing, money-eating pony she'd begged for relentlessly for 3 months. She rode it maybe a dozen times before the novelty wore off and it became just another chore for my dad. The justification for this blatant disparity was always the same. "Oh, but she's the dreamer," my dad would say, ruffling her blonde curls. "Emma has her feet on the ground, but Vanessa, she has her head in the clouds." What they never said out loud, but what I always understood, was that my feet were on the ground because I was expected to pave my own way. Vanessa's head was in the clouds because she expected her way to be paved for her, usually with my parents' money and my emotional labor. This wasn't just a childhood thing, the pattern bled into our adult lives. When Vanessa was 24, she decided to take a spontaneous trip to Miami with friends, a trip she absolutely could not afford. I got the call at 2 in the morning. She was crying, hysterical, saying the hotel was about to kick her out because she'd maxed out her credit card. "I don't know what to do, Em. Can you help me? Just this once?" I was tired. I had an early meeting the next day. But I did what I always did. I got out of bed, logged into my online banking, and transferred $1,000 from my savings account, the account I was painstakingly building for a down payment on a house someday. The relief in her voice was immediate. "Oh my God, you're a lifesaver. I'll pay you back as soon as I get home, I swear." I never saw a dime of that money. When I brought it up a month later, she just laughed it off. "Oh, come on, you know I'm good for it." It was easier to let it go than to fight the losing battle. I was the family fixer. Vanessa was the one who always got to be broken. So, when I met Jason, it felt like a seismic shift in my universe. He was charming, handsome, and ambitious, and for 3 wonderful years, he made me feel seen. He saw me not as a utility, but as a partner. We got engaged, and I dove headfirst into planning a life with him, a life I thought we were building together. I was a logistics manager at a firm I'd been with for 8 years. The work was demanding, the hours often brutal, but I was good at it, and the salary was steady. It was the bedrock upon which I was building our future. Jason, however, had a taste for things that were far from bedrock. He didn't want a simple wedding. He wanted an event. He'd spend hours scrolling through blogs, sending me links to converted industrial lofts downtown with exposed brick and hanging Edison bulbs that cost a fortune. He wanted the celebrity-endorsed caterer, the photographer with a 6-month waiting list. "We only get to do this once, babe," he'd say, his eyes shining with a desire that I mistook for love of me, but was really just love of luxury. We deserve the best. And because I loved him, and because my entire life had conditioned me to be the one who makes things happen, I said okay. I told my boss I was available for any and all overtime. My life became a blur of spreadsheets, shipping manifests, and exhaustion. I was pulling 60, sometimes 70-hour weeks. I'd come home so tired I could barely eat, my body ached in places I didn't know could ache, but I kept my eyes on the prize, the day I would marry the man I loved, in a wedding paid for by my own sweat, blood, and sacrifice. All the while, Vanessa was focusing on her healing, a vague, 2-year-long process that seemed to involve a lot of brunch and 0 job applications. Our parents, of course, thought this was wonderful. "She's finding herself," my mom would say proudly. I was finding myself at the bottom of a pile of invoices, but no one seemed to notice that. Then the heat wave hit. The kind of oppressive, suffocating heat that makes the city feel like it's holding its breath. Our apartment, a decent 2-bedroom place that I had lovingly decorated with finds from Target and HomeGoods to make it feel like a sanctuary, turned into a blast furnace. The old AC unit, a relic that had been rattling ominously for months, finally gave up the ghost with a sad, metallic sigh. Within hours, the air was thick and still, the walls felt like they were sweating. I called maintenance, my voice sticking in my throat. The guy was sympathetic but delivered the bad news with a practiced weariness. "The cooling coil is completely shot. With this heat, every unit in the city is dropping like flies. It'll be a minimum of 5 to 7 days to get the part in." 5 to 7 days. It felt like a prison sentence. That night, I was texting Vanessa, just venting about the miserable situation. Before I could even finish typing, my phone was ringing. Her voice, when she answered, was a symphony of manufactured concern. "Oh my God, Em, that's just horrible. You can't stay there. It's not safe. You guys have to come stay with me. I have central air, the pool, a guest room, it's really no trouble at all." I hesitated. A familiar weariness washed over me. I hated imposing, especially on her, because it always came with invisible strings. But when I mentioned the offer to Jason, his face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Are you kidding? That's perfect. It'll be like a mini vacation before the wedding." He was already talking about using her pool, about how much more comfortable it would be than a cramped hotel room. He was so enthusiastic, so completely oblivious to my hesitation, that I gave in. Exhausted, overheated, and too tired to argue, I agreed. We packed a few overnight bags and drove over to her trendy apartment complex, the one I knew for a fact my parents were still helping her pay for. The first couple of days were deceptively normal. I'd leave for my shift before dawn, a ghost slipping out into the pre-dawn humidity, and return long after sunset, a shell of a person running on caffeine and fumes. I'd walk in, and the scene was always the same, Jason and Vanessa, sprawled on her plush sectional couch, bathed in the cool, blue light of her giant television, laughing at some show. "Jason and I started watching this crazy documentary about cults," she'd say, and I'd force a smile, too tired to register the easy intimacy in her voice. I was just glad he wasn't bored while I was gone. But then, the little things started. Tiny, dissonant notes in the melody of their friendship. Things you tried to dismiss as products of your own exhaustion and paranoia. Vanessa, who I knew for a fact considered cooking to be microwaving a lean cuisine, was suddenly preparing these elaborate, multi-course meals. Jason was just telling me how much he loves chicken parmesan, so I thought I'd give it a try, she'd announce proudly, beaming at him as he took a bite. Her wardrobe changed, too. At home, she lived in oversized sweatshirts and yoga pants. At her place, even with the central air cranking so high I needed a sweater, she was constantly in these tiny shorts and flimsy tank tops that left very little to the imagination. "It's just so hot out," she'd say with an innocent shrug if she caught me looking. But it wasn't hot in the apartment. It was freezing. By day 4, the knot of anxiety in my stomach had grown into a cold, heavy stone. Vanessa, the ultimate social butterfly whose phone was usually buzzing with plans, hadn't left the house once since we arrived. She, who always had a date or a girls' night scheduled, was suddenly a complete homebody. She and Jason had developed a whole repertoire of inside jokes, whispering and giggling in the kitchen until I walked in, at which point they would fall into an abrupt, guilty silence. The air would crackle with an awkwardness so thick I could taste it. One evening, I came home a little earlier than usual. I walked in quietly and found them on the couch, sitting so close their legs were touching, sharing a pair of earbuds and watching something on his phone. They didn't hear me come in. I saw the way she looked at him, a soft, adoring expression I had never seen her give anyone. And I saw the way he smiled back, a private, intimate smile that was meant only for her. When I cleared my throat, they jumped apart like they'd been electrocuted. The guilt on their faces was palpable. "Just watching a funny video," Jason said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. I told myself I was being crazy. I told myself I was just stressed from work, jealous of the easy bond they were forming while I was away. I was so focused on saving that last $1,000 for the venue deposit, a surprise I was planning to spring on Jason that weekend, that I deliberately, willfully, pushed my gut feeling down. I chose to trust the man I was going to marry. I chose to trust my sister. A week after we arrived, the call finally came. Our AC was fixed. As we packed our bags, a sense of profound relief washed over me. I couldn't wait to get back to my own space, my own life. As we were leaving, Jason pulled Vanessa into a hug. It wasn't a friendly goodbye. It was an embrace. It was long, too long. He held on tight, his hand sliding down to rest on the small of her back, his fingers splayed possessively. I felt a hot, prickling sensation crawl up my neck. It felt like I was watching a scene from a movie, a scene I wasn't supposed to see. On the drive home, the silence in the car was deafening. I finally broke it. "What was that hug about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, casual. It seemed a little intense. He just laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't be weird, Em. She was just being nice, letting us crash for a week. I was just thanking her." I let it go. I wanted to believe him more than anything in the world. The following day, I even went out and bought Vanessa a beautiful, expensive silver bracelet from Tiffany's as a thank you gift. I was trying to kill my own suspicions with kindness. Life was supposed to go back to normal. But it was a fractured, distorted version of normal. Jason became distant, almost a stranger in our own home. He was glued to his phone, constantly texting, a secretive little smile playing on his lips. He'd angle the screen away if I came near. He started taking these long, mysterious shopping trips with friends on Saturdays, but would always come home empty-handed and smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. The cold stone of anxiety in my stomach was back, and it was heavier than ever. I felt like I was going crazy, living in a house of cards that was about to collapse. Then came the Tuesday that brought it all down. It was a brutal day at the warehouse. A shipment was late, my boss was breathing down my neck, and I was physically pushing myself to the absolute limit to get a truck unloaded before the deadline. My whole body screamed with exhaustion. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my jeans. I almost ignored it, but some dark premonition made me pull it out. It was a text from Jason. 5 words. 5 words that took the world I had built and detonated it. "I'm going to be a father. It's not with you." I stared at the screen, my brain short-circuiting. The sounds of the warehouse, the rumble of the forklift, the shouting of my coworkers, faded into a dull roar. The letters on the screen seemed to blur and rearrange themselves. It couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. A sick, twisted joke. My coworker, Miguel, a good man with a family of his own, must have seen the color drain from my face. "Emma? You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't form words. My throat had closed up. I just held out the phone, my hand shaking uncontrollably. He took it, his eyes scanning the screen. A low whistle escaped his lips. "Damn, girl. You gotta go home. Now. I'll cover for you." The drive home was a terrifying out-of-body experience. I don't remember the traffic, the turns, the red lights. My hands were locked on the steering wheel in a death grip, my knuckles white. My mind was a chaotic hurricane of betrayal and disbelief. Who? When? How? A small, stupidly naive part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in the life I had planned, clung to the hope that this was some terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, a cold, sickening certainty was already crystallizing in my veins. It was Vanessa. It had to be. All the weirdness, the stolen glances, the lingering hug, the secret texts, it all clicked into place with the horrifying finality of a coffin lid shutting. I walked into our apartment, and the first thing I saw was him, sitting on the edge of the couch, his head buried in his hands. He looked up when he heard the door close, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw him for what he truly was, a weak, pathetic coward. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale. He started crying before I even said a word. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he whimpered, the words tumbling out in a pathetic rush. And then came the line that sealed his fate, the lie so insulting, so transparently self-serving that it extinguished the last flickering ember of love I had for him. Vanessa, she forced herself on me. She came on so strong. I didn't know what to do. He was blaming her. He was trying to paint himself as the victim. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it stopped my heart. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a terrifying, unnatural calm settle over me, a layer of ice forming over the raging inferno inside. "She forced herself on you?" I asked. My voice was a stranger's, flat and devoid of any emotion. "That's a very serious accusation, Jason." He flinched at my tone, the lack of hysteria clearly unnerving him. "Well, not forced, exactly," he stammered, his story already beginning to unravel. "But she was really aggressive. You know how she can be. And we were staying in her house, I didn't want to make things awkward." The ice in my veins began to burn. "Awkward," I repeated, the word tasting like poison. "So, let me get this straight. For an entire week, while I was working myself into an early grave for our wedding, you were being held hostage in a suburban apartment by my sister's aggressive advances? You watched TV with your captor, ate her cooking, laughed at her jokes, all under duress?" He started sobbing harder, a disgusting, gulping sound. "You don't understand. It just happened. We were watching a movie, and one thing led to another. One thing led to another." The pathetic anthem of a man with no spine, no loyalty, no honor. "When did it happen, Jason?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor as he mumbled the words that would haunt me for months. "The second night. After you fell asleep on the couch from exhaustion." The image that flashed in my mind was so vivid it made me physically recoil. Me, dead to the world, my body aching from a double shift, while they, in the next room, in her bed, betraying me. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the back of a chair to keep from falling. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. That was the moment the heartbroken woman died. The shock, the grief, the searing pain, they didn't disappear. They were transmuted. They were compressed under the immense pressure of his betrayal and his insulting lies, and they crystallized into something new. Something hard, and sharp, and unbreakable. A cold, calculating resolve. He had not only broken my heart, he had insulted my intelligence. He had looked at my love and my sacrifice and deemed them worthless. I didn't say another word to him. I turned, walked into our bedroom, my bedroom, and methodically packed a bag. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop. I moved with a strange, detached precision, as if I were watching someone else. He followed me, babbling apologies and excuses, but I didn't hear him. His voice was just meaningless noise. I walked out of the apartment, out of the life we had built, and didn't look back. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I drove until I found the seediest, most anonymous motel I could find, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and a lingering smell of stale cigarettes and despair. I checked in, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the stiff, scratchy bedspread. For a long time, I just stared at the peeling paint on the wall. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a white-hot rage that hummed under my skin like a live wire. But I knew rage was a blunt instrument. Rage was messy, impulsive. It would give me a moment of satisfaction, but it wouldn't give me justice. For what they had done, I needed more than that. I needed to be cold. I needed to be methodical. I needed to be the architect of their ruin. My first step was to gather my ammunition. Jason's tearful, pathetic confession was a start, but it was his word against hers. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed to know the full extent of their deception. The next morning, my hands still trembling with a mixture of anger and adrenaline, I made the call. I called the only other person in the world who was as much a victim in this as I was, Mark, Vanessa's long-suffering boyfriend. He was a decent guy, a quiet software engineer who adored my sister and was completely blind to her manipulative nature. He deserved to know the truth. The conversation was one of the hardest I've ever had to initiate. I laid it all out for him, my voice steady and clinical, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside me. Mark, I have reason to believe that Vanessa and Jason have been having an affair. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. That's crazy, Emma, he finally said, but his voice was thin, lacking any real conviction. He knew her. He knew it wasn't crazy at all. I told him what Jason had confessed. I told him about the timeline, about it starting the second night we were staying at their place. He says it was her, I said, choosing my words carefully. But he's a liar. I need to know the truth. I could almost feel his world tilting on its axis through the phone. I knew for a fact that Vanessa had an iPad that was synced to her iPhone. I'd seen her use it 1,000,000 times, her messages popping up on both screens simultaneously. Mark, I said, my voice softening with genuine sympathy. I know this is an awful thing to ask you to do. But if you want to know for sure, check her messages. They're probably synced on her iPad. He was quiet for another long moment, and then he just said, okay, his voice a tight, strangled whisper. He hung up. The next few hours were the longest of my life. I paced the small, grimy motel room like a caged animal. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. I just waited for the axe to fall. Then, my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was completely different. It was hollowed out, broken. You were right, he whispered, and his voice cracked on the last word. It's all here. God, Emma, it's all here. Hundreds of messages. Pictures. He sounded like he was going to be physically sick. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Mark, I said, my own voice surprisingly firm, the architect in me taking over. Will you do me a favor? A big one? Can you forward everything to me? Every single message. Every picture. He agreed without a moment's hesitation. A few minutes later, my email inbox began to fill up. And as I opened the first email and started to read, the last vestiges of my grief were incinerated by a pure, undiluted fury. What I saw was so much worse, so much more calculated and cruel than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a sordid affair. It was a meticulously planned conspiracy. I scrolled through months of messages, my stomach churning. They mocked me. They had nicknames for me. The workhorse. The cash cow. The human ATM. They laughed about how hard I was working, how exhausted I was, how completely and utterly oblivious I was to their deception. Jason would complain about my long hours, and Vanessa would reply with texts like, just a little longer, baby. Soon we won't have to worry about money ever again. And then I saw it. The message that laid their entire, despicable plan bare. The minor twist that felt like a serrated knife being twisted in my gut. They weren't going to tell me. Their plan was to let me work myself to the bone, to let me drain my savings and my grandmother's inheritance to pay for the entire, lavish $50,000 wedding. Then, after the honeymoon, a honeymoon I would have paid for, Vanessa was going to announce her pregnancy. They were going to leave me, publicly humiliated and financially ruined, to start their new life together, funded by my money. The pregnancy hadn't been an accident that forced their hand. It had just accelerated their timeline. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't one thing led to another. This was grand larceny disguised as love. They weren't just cheating on us, Mark and me. They were trying to rob me blind. They saw my love, my trust, and my sacrifice as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. In that cheap, disgusting motel room, with the glowing screen of my laptop illuminating the evidence of their treachery, I stopped being heartbroken Emma. I became an architect. An architect of consequences. And I was about to build them a prison of their own making. My first calls were to the wedding vendors. My voice was calm, professional, as I spoke to the coordinator at the expensive downtown loft. I'm calling to cancel the event scheduled for October 12th. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, she said. May I ask the reason? Change of plans, I said, and hung up. The caterer, the photographer, the DJ, the florist. One by one, I dismantled the fantasy wedding they had planned to use as the stage for my public humiliation. Some of the deposits were non-refundable. I didn't care. It was a small price to pay to begin erasing the future they had tried to steal from me. Then, I turned my attention to Jason. The trove of texts Mark had sent was a goldmine of self-incrimination. Dozens of them were time-stamped during his work hours. Jason worked in sales for a prestigious tech company, a place that prided itself on its family-first culture and had a strict policy about using company time and resources for personal matters. He was often working from home, a privilege he was clearly, flagrantly abusing. I set up a new, anonymous email address. I carefully composed a message to his direct supervisor, a man I'd met a few times at company holiday parties, a conservative family man who often spoke about the importance of integrity. I attached a carefully curated selection of the most damning screenshots, the ones where Jason was arranging his lunchtime hookups with Vanessa while supposedly logged into a virtual sales meeting. I wrote, I am a concerned party who believes this behavior does not align with your company's stated values of integrity and professionalism. I thought you should be aware of the character of the man representing your organization in the marketplace. I hit send, a cold smile touching my lips. Next on the list was Vanessa. Her lifelong dream, funded by a seemingly endless stream of parental handouts, was to open a boutique yoga and fitness studio. She'd been courting a small group of local investors, trying to get the seed money to secure a lease. One of those investors, as fate would have it, was the husband of an old college friend of mine. It's a small world when you're looking for leverage. Another anonymous email was drafted. This time, I attached the screenshots of Vanessa bragging about her plan to secure her financial future through my wedding fund, and another where she joked about how easy it was to manipulate old, rich men into giving her what she wanted. Is this the kind of fiscal responsibility and personal character you want managing your investment? The email concluded. I sent it. But the centerpiece of my plan, the part that required the patience and precision of a master strategist, involved my family. It was the part that would finally address the rotten core of favoritism and enablement that had allowed Vanessa to become the monster she was. I knew what was coming. As surely as the sun rises, my parents would call a family summit, an intervention, where they would attempt to browbeat and guilt me into forgiving and forgetting for the sake of keeping the peace. And I was going to let them. I was going to walk right into the lion's den. But this time, I wasn't going to be the lamb for the slaughter. A few days later, just as I had predicted, my mother called. Her voice was laced with that weary, disappointed tone she had perfected over years of me failing to live up to her expectations of quiet compliance. Emma, we need to talk. This has gone on long enough. Your father and I are having you, Jason, and Vanessa over for dinner on Sunday. It's time to work through this like adults and figure out a path forward. Of course, Mom, I said, my voice a perfect imitation of my old, dutiful self. I'll be there. That Sunday, I walked into my parents' house, the stage for so many of my childhood humiliations. The air was thick with a cloying, artificial calm. Vanessa was there, perched on the sofa, her hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, her eyes artfully red-rimmed as if she'd been crying for days. Jason was pale and fidgety, a ghost haunting the scene of the crime, unable to meet my gaze. My parents sat at the head of the dining room table like a king and queen presiding over a kangaroo court. They didn't even wait for the pot roast to be served. "Emma, you are tearing this family apart," my father began, his voice booming with self-righteous authority. "People make mistakes. Lord knows I've made a few. Your sister is deeply sorry. And more importantly, she's pregnant. There's a child to think about. You can't just throw away your future with Jason over one mistake." My mother chimed in, her voice softer but no less sharp. "You've always been so strong, Emma. So rigid. Sometimes in a marriage, in a family, you need to learn to be a little softer. You need to learn to forgive." They were tag-teaming me, painting me as the villain. The cold, unforgiving shrew who was punishing poor, delicate, pregnant Vanessa for a simple, youthful indiscretion. I let them talk. I let them spin their narrative. I let them dig their own graves. When they were finally finished, a heavy, expectant silence fell over the room. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water. "I see," I said, my voice perfectly even, betraying none of the volcanic rage simmering beneath the surface. "You think this was a mistake?" I pulled out my phone and placed it on the polished mahogany table. "I think it's best if we're all honest about what really happened." I tapped the screen, and I started to read. I read the texts where they called me their cash cow. I read the messages where they laughed about how hard I was working, how I was killing myself for their future. I read, word for word, their entire, despicable plan to let me pay for the wedding, to stand by my side at the altar, and then to abandon me, pregnant and broke, after the honeymoon. With every sentence I read, the color drained from Vanessa's face. Jason looked like he was going to be physically ill. My parents were, for the first time in their lives, completely speechless. My father finally found his voice, sputtering, "That's just talk. Kids being stupid. The point is, there's a baby on the way. Jason has to do the right thing. And what about the wedding money? The inheritance? You can't just cancel everything." And that's when I played my final card. The ace I had been holding up my sleeve. The one they never, ever saw coming. "The wedding money," I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "That's a very good point, Dad." I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope, placing it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. "You're referring, of course, to the inheritance from Grandma Helen's trust fund. The one you, as the executor of her estate, always told me I couldn't touch without your approval." My father nodded, a flicker of his old authority returning to his eyes. "That's right. It's for your wedding, for your future. It's protected." "Funny," I said, sliding a sheaf of legal documents out of the envelope. "Because when I had my lawyer review the trust, he said something quite different. He said that upon my 30th birthday, I gained sole and absolute control over that account. Your signature was never required. It was just another lie you told to control me, to keep me under your thumb." I let that sink in, watching the dawning horror on his face. So, I took my lawyer's advice. Last week, I had him dissolve the old trust. The entire inheritance, every last penny, has been moved to a new, private investment account under my name only. I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the suffocating silence. Then, I looked directly at Jason and Vanessa. Their faces were masks of pure, unfiltered horror. The blood had drained from their faces, leaving them looking like pale, desperate ghosts. "There is no wedding," I said, my voice like a shard of ice. There is no money. There is nothing left for you to take. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my life. It was broken by a strangled, animalistic sob from Vanessa. Jason just stared at the document, his mouth hanging open, his get-rich-quick dream dissolving before his very eyes. My parents looked like they had been physically struck. I stood up from the table, my movements calm and deliberate. I twisted the engagement ring off my finger, the 3-carat diamond that I now knew was just a down payment on my future misery. I placed it gently on the table next to the legal document. I believe this belongs to you, I said to no one in particular. And then I turned around and walked out of that house, out of that toxic family dynamic, and into my new life, leaving the complete and utter wreckage of their lives behind me. I didn't look back. As I got to my car, the front door flew open and Jason came stumbling out, screaming my name. He tried to block my car, his face a desperate, tear-streaked mess. "Emma, please. We can fix this. I love you." I rolled down the window just an inch, enough for him to hear my final words to him. "The person you were engaged to is gone," I said, my voice completely empty of the love I once felt for him. "You and my sister made sure of that. You didn't love me. You loved what I could do for you. Good luck with your new life. You're going to need it." I rolled up the window and drove away, watching him shrink in my rearview mirror until he was nothing more than a pathetic speck. The fallout was swift and spectacular, just as I had planned. A week later, I heard through our mutual friend, Sarah, that Jason had been called into a meeting with his boss in HR. He was put on indefinite probation for gross misuse of company time and resources. His work-from-home privileges were permanently revoked, and his promising career path, including a much-anticipated promotion and salary increase, evaporated overnight. His side hustle, the dropshipping business he ran during his work hours, collapsed without his constant attention. His income was cut in half. Vanessa's dream of a boutique fitness studio died an even quicker, more public death. The investors, after receiving my anonymous email, pulled out unanimously. No one, it turned out, wanted to go into business with a manipulative, untrustworthy liar. And Mark, armed with the mountain of evidence I'd provided, had filed for divorce. His lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit, was using the proof of infidelity and her attempts to hide assets to ensure she walked away with next to nothing from their shared life. They both tried to contact me, of course. A relentless barrage of texts and calls from burner numbers. First came the saccharine, unbelievable apologies. Then the desperate begging. Then, finally, the venomous blame. Vanessa accused me of ruining her life, of being a cruel, jealous monster. Jason told me I was being vindictive and that I would regret throwing away our love. I blocked every number. I read none of it. Their voices were just the meaningless noise of ghosts from a life I had already left behind. With them finally, blessedly silenced, I started to rebuild. I took the money from Grandma Helen's trust, my money, my inheritance, and I invested it in myself. I paid off my car loan in one lump sum. I hired a company to rip out the old, rattling AC unit in my apartment and install a brand new, top-of-the-line HVAC system. The quiet, efficient hum of the cold air was the sound of victory. The irony was not lost on me. I started hitting the gym, not to lose weight or to look a certain way for someone else, but because the burn in my muscles reminded me that I was strong, that I could withstand pressure and come out stronger. And on a whim one Saturday, I drove to the local animal shelter, just to look. That's where I met Vesper, a goofy Labrador mix with one floppy ear and soulful brown eyes that were full of nothing but pure, uncomplicated love. He'd been found abandoned on the side of a highway. We kind of saved each other. He became my shadow, my loyal companion. No lies, no side missions, no betrayal. Just tail wags and unconditional affection. About 6 months after that disastrous final family dinner, Sarah called me with an update. Jason had been let go from his job during a round of corporate restructuring. He was unemployed and had been forced to move back into his parents' basement at 34 years old. Vanessa had given birth to a baby boy. Jason, true to his cowardly form, had demanded a paternity test and, upon confirmation that the child was his, refused to be involved, claiming he couldn't afford child support now that he was unemployed. Vanessa, abandoned by the man she had thrown her life away for, had been forced to move back to our hometown, living in her old childhood bedroom with a newborn, working part-time at a vape shop to make ends meet. The golden child's shine had finally, irrevocably, worn off. They had built their entire sordid plan on the foundation of my hard work and my love, assuming I would be a passive, weeping victim in their drama. They fundamentally underestimated me. They saw my kindness as weakness, my generosity as a resource to be plundered. They didn't realize that the same grit and determination that allowed me to work 70-hour weeks for a wedding could be repurposed with terrifying efficiency. They had destroyed their own lives. I had just made sure the wreckage was public, and the escape routes were sealed. Last month, I took that trip to Iceland, the one I'd always dreamed of. I stood on a black sand beach, the cold, clean air crisp on my face, and watched the northern lights dance across the vast, dark sky in shimmering, ethereal waves of green and purple. It was the most beautiful, awe-inspiring thing I had ever seen. And in that moment, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly free. I had Vesper waiting for me back home, a job I was still damn good at, and a future that was entirely, gloriously, my own. The silence in my life was no longer empty, it was peaceful. And I realized that vengeance doesn't always have to be a loud, fiery explosion. Sometimes, it's the quiet, satisfying hum of a brand new air conditioner in a home you've reclaimed, a life you've rebuilt, all for yourself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I felt like I needed to. For anyone out there who has ever been made to feel small, or taken for granted, or betrayed by the very people who are supposed to love you the most, I want you to know that you are not alone, and you are not broken. My question for you all is, have you ever had a moment in your life that forced you to finally, unequivocally, choose yourself? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. You are so much stronger than you think.